And then there's a vicious rumor floating around that I think could really hurt Mitt Romney. I heard he passed universal health care when he was governor of Massachusetts. Someone should get to the bottom of that. And I know just the guy to do it. Donald Trump is here tonight. Now I know that he's taken some flack lately, but no one is happier, no one is prouder to put this birth certificate matter to rest than the Donald. And that's because he can finally get back to focusing on the issues that matter. Like, did we fake the moon landing? What really happened in Roswell? And where are Biggie and Tupac? All kidding aside, obviously we all know about your credentials and breadth of experience. For example, no, seriously, just recently in an episode of Celebrity Apprentice at the steakhouse, the men's cooking team did not impress the judges from Omaha Steaks. And there was a lot of blame to go around, but you, Mr. Trump, recognized that the real problem was a lack of leadership. And so ultimately you didn't blame Little John or Meatloaf. You fired Gary Busey. And these are the kind of decisions that would keep me up at night. Well handled, sir. Well handled. Say what you will about Mr. Trump. He certainly would bring some change to the White House. Let's see what we've got up there.
Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, did you discuss the July 25th phone call with anyone outside the White House on July 25th or the 26th? And if so, with whom?
Yes, I did. My core function is to coordinate U.S. government policy, interagency policy, and I spoke to two individuals with regards to providing some sort of readout of the call.
Two individuals that were not in the White House?
Not in the White House, cleared U.S. government officials with appropriate need to know.
And what agencies were these officials with?
Department of State, Deputy Assistant Secretary George Kent, who is responsible for the portfolio Eastern Europe, including Ukraine, and a individual from the office of an individual in the intelligence community.
As you know, the intelligence community has 17 different agencies. What agency was this individual from?
If I could interject here, we don't want to use these proceedings.
It's our time.
I know,
Chair.
but we need to protect the whistleblower.
Please stop.
I want to make sure that there's no effort to out the whistleblower through these proceedings. If the witness has a good faith belief that this may reveal the identity of the whistleblower, that is not the purpose that we are here for, and I want to advise the witness accordingly.
Mr. Vindman, you testified in your deposition that you did not know the whistleblower.
Ranking member, it's Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, please.
Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, you testified in the deposition that you did not know who the whistleblower was. Or is?
I do not know who the whistleblower is. That is.
Well, how is it possible for you to name these people and then out the whistleblower?
Per the advice of my counsel, I've been advised not to answer specific questions about members of the intelligence community.
Are you aware that this is the Intelligence Committee that's conducting an impeachment hearing?
Of course I am.
Wouldn't the appropriate place for you to come to testify would be the Intelligence Committee about someone within the intelligence community?
Ranking member, per the advice of my counsel and the instructions from the chairman, I've been advised not to provide any specifics on who I have spoken to inside the intelligence community. What I can offer is that these were properly cleared individuals, or was a properly cleared individual with a need to know.
My 25th phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky. There was you, the individual sitting beside you, Ms. Williams, and then there, of course, was your boss, Mr. Morrison, who I just read from his deposition. When we asked Ms. Williams who she spoke to after the call about the call, she was willing to answer our questions, and chairmanship allowed her to answer our questions. When we asked Mr. Morrison who he spoke to after the call about the call, he was willing to answer our question, and Mr. Chairmanship allowed him to answer our question. But when we asked you first told us 3 individuals at the NSC, your brother and the 2 lawyers. And then you said there was a group of other people you communicated with, but you would only give us 1 individual in that group, Secretary Kent. And the chairman would only allow you to give us that name. When we asked you who else you communicated with, you would not tell us. So I want to know first, how many other people are in that group of people you communicated with outside the 4 individuals I just named?
Yes, Mr. Jordan, on call readout, certainly after the first call, there were probably a half a dozen or more people that I read out. Those are people with the proper clearance and the need to know. In this case, because of the sensitivity of the call, and Mr. Eisenberg told me not to speak to anybody else, I only read out, outside of the NSC, 2 individuals.
2 individuals.
Das Kent and 1 other person.
And you're not willing to tell us who that other individual is?
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
The gentleman suspend, counsel.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask you to enforce the rule with regard to disclosure with regard to the intelligence officer.
Thank you, counsel. As I indicated before, this committee will not be used to out the whistleblower. That same
Mr. Chairman,
necessity of
can you stop the time so I don't lose the time?
will persist. You are recognized again, Mr. Jordan.
Mr. Chairman, I don't see how this is outing the whistleblower. The witness has testified in his deposition that he doesn't know who the whistleblower is. You have said, even though no one believes you have said you don't know who the whistleblower is. So how is this outing the whistleblower to find out who this individual is?
Mr. Jordan, this is your time for questioning. You can use it any way you like, but your question should be addressed to the witness. And your question should not be addressed to trying to out the whistleblower.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to start with the July 25th call between President Trump and President Zelensky. Mr. Morrison, you were on that call, and there was no mention of withholding aid on the call, correct?
That's correct, Congresswoman.
And there was no quid pro quo, correct?
Correct.
No bribery?
Correct.
No extortion?
Correct.
And Ambassador Volker, I presume you got a readout of the call, is that correct?
Very terse readout, but yes.
In this tertiary readout of the call, Ambassador, from the U.S. participants, was there any reference to withholding aid?
No, there was not.
Any reference to bribery?
No, there was not.
Any reference to quid pro quo?
No, there was not.
Any reference to extortion?
No, there was not.
And I presume you also got feedback from your Ukrainian counterparts as to how the call went. Did they mention the withholding of aid?
No, they did not.
Did they mention any quid pro quo?
No, they did not.
And did they mention any bribery?
No, they did not.
And in fact, the day after the call, you met with President Zelensky. This would be on July 26th.
That's correct.
And in that meeting, he made no mention of quid pro quo.
No.
He made no mention of withholding the aid.
No.
He made no mention of bribery.
No.
So the fact is the Ukrainians were not even aware of this hold on aid. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And in the coming weeks, You were in touch with Ukrainians as part of your official duties, and this included talking to Ukrainians over the phone, in person, on text, and the Ukrainians never brought up an investigation into the Bidens. Is that correct?
That's correct.
They never brought up the withholding of the aid.
That's correct.
They never brought up quid pro quo or bribery.
Let me bring up the aid. They did bring that up after the Politico article appeared on the...
I'm going to get to that, but until the Politico article,
then, no.
they did not bring it up. And you said in your closed-door deposition, quote, "It never came up in conversation with them, and I believe they had trust in me that they would have asked if that was really what they were worried about." Is that correct?
That is correct.
And as you pointed out, the Ukrainians never even knew their foreign aid was on pause until the article was published in Politico in August.
That's correct.
With two questions for the both of you. Did Ukraine open an investigation into the Bidens? Mr. Morrison.
Not to my knowledge, ma'am.
Ambassador Volker.
Not to my knowledge either.
Did either of you ever have any evidence of quid pro quo? Mr. Morrison.
No, ma'am.
Ambassador Volker.
I did not.
Any evidence of bribery?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am.
Any evidence of treason?
No, ma'am.
No evidence of treason.
With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. In a press conference last Thursday, Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, said that President Trump committed the impeachable offense of bribery, evidenced in his July 25th call transcript with President Zelensky. In concert with that, multiple Democratic members of this committee gave TV and radio interviews over this past week discussing how the president's conduct supported his impeachment for committing bribery, all of which struck me as very odd, because for the longest time this was all about quid pro quo, according to the whistleblower complaint. But after witness began saying there was no quid pro quo, or even that quid pro quo was not even possible, we saw a shift from the Democrats. They briefly started to refer to the president's conduct on the July 25th call as extortion. And now it shifted again last week to bribery. Ms. Williams, you used the word unusual to describe the president's call on July 25th. Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, you used the word inappropriate and proper. Now, I word searched each of your transcripts, and the word bribery or bribe doesn't appear anywhere in that. Ms. Williams, you've never used the word bribery or bribe to explain President Trump's conduct, correct?
No, sir.
Colonel Vindman, you haven't either.
That is correct.
The problem is, in an impeachment inquiry that the Speaker of the House says is all about bribery, where bribery is the impeachable offense, no witness has used the word bribery to describe President Trump's conduct. None of them. These aren't all of the deposition transcripts. These are just the 10 that have been released. These people are sick. 6 weeks of witness interviews in this impeachment inquiry, hundreds of hours of testimony, thousands of questions asked, thousands of answers given. The number of times that witnesses have been asked any question about whether or not President Trump's conduct constituted bribery before Ambassador Yovanovitch was asked by my colleague, Congressman Stewart, last Thursday, is 0. The number of times witnesses have used the word bribery or bribe to describe President Trump's conduct in the last 6 weeks of this inquiry is 0. In fact, in these 3,500 pages of sworn deposition testimony and just these 10 transcripts released thus far, the word bribery appears in these 3,500 pages exactly one time. And ironically, it appears not in a description of President Trump's alleged conduct. It appears in a description of Vice President Biden's alleged conduct.
This is important because as early as next week, my Democratic colleagues are going to say we need to vote on the evidence from this impeachment inquiry on the impeachment of the president for bribery. And they're going to send a report to the Judiciary Committee, and because there's more Democrats than Republicans, it's going to likely pass. And when that happens, the American people need to be clear that when the Democrats, what they are describing as bribery, not a single witness is describing as bribery. We've heard many times in the course of this proceeding that the facts of the president are not in dispute. But the American people are asking, if the facts are the same, why do the crimes that the president is being accused of keep changing? Why do we go from quid pro quo to extortion, now to bribery? Chairman Nunes told you the answer. The answer is polling. The Washington Times asked Americans, what would be the most damning accusation? And it didn't come back quid pro quo, it didn't come back extortion, it came back bribery. So this case is all about bribery. Look, it's bad enough that the Democrats have forbidden White House lawyers from participating in this proceeding. It's hard enough to defend yourself without your lawyers present. But what's even worse is trying to defend yourself against an accusation that keeps changing in the middle of the proceeding. If Democrats accuse the president of a high crime or impeachable offense, he at least ought to know which one it is. And when Speaker Pelosi says this is all about bribery, she's promised us evidence of bribery that would be compelling and overwhelming, and instead, it's invisible. I yield back.
Well, there you go. That went on basically all day, the impeachment hearings on Capitol Hill. Good evening. As we continue our show tonight, the circus train of impeachment remains stalled on the tracks. Official Washington trapped in gridlock, thanks to what you just saw. Around the world, foreign governments are quaking and toppling. Our own economy, by the way, is making some ominous noises that you would think somebody in charge might want to pay some attention to, but no. Here in Washington, our leaders remain transfixed by what you just saw. Transfixed by figures like Alexander Vindman, a low-level U.S. Army officer who played the role of star in today's hearings. It's a measure of how central Vindman and people like Vindman are to a certain kind of storyline. The many media outlets today resolutely ignored the following exchange. Maybe the most remarkable thing that happened today. It happened on live television, but you may not have seen it. Here it is.
You went to Ukraine for the inauguration?
Correct.
20th? At any point during that trip, did Mr. Daniluk offer you a position of defense minister with the Ukrainian government?
He did.
And how many times did he do that?
I believe it was 3 times.
And
Wait, what? He was offered defense minister 3 times? Keep in mind that Alexander Vindman was born in Ukraine, speaks Ukrainian, and clearly has strongly held views about Ukrainian politics, views that may or may not align with U.S. policy on the subject. Now we learn that the Ukrainian government repeatedly asked Vindman to take formal control of the entire Ukrainian military, which, for the record, is a very strange thing to ask of an active duty American military officer. And yet somehow, that constellation of facts did not raise a single red flag for our self-appointed watchdogs in the news media. Alexander Vindman is hurting Trump. Therefore, he's an American hero. That's what they know, and they don't want to know any more than that.
These people are sick.
It's just if you have questions, shut up and stop asking questions, says the reporter. Adamantly uninterested, for example, in the identity of the so-called whistleblower. We learned that today from this, probably the weirdest exchange. Watch Vindman's cryptic description of the man with no name.
I spoke to 2 individuals with regards to providing some sort of readout of the call.
And what agencies were these officials with?
Department of State Deputy Assistant Secretary George Kent, who is responsible for the portfolio Eastern Europe, including Ukraine, and an individual from the office of an individual in the intelligence community.
An individual in the intelligence community. Well, who is that exactly? Devin Nunes wanted to know. Sorry, Adam Schiff, who, by the way, has claimed not to know the identity of the whistleblower, interrupted to block the question. Watch this.
As you know, the intelligence community has 17 different agencies. What agency was this individual from?
If I could interject here, we don't want to use these proceedings.
It's our time.
I know,
Chair.
but we need to protect the whistleblower.
Please stop.
I want to make sure that there's no effort to out the whistleblower through the use of these proceedings. If the witness has a good faith belief that this may reveal the identity of the whistleblower, that is not the purpose that we are here for, and I want to advise the witness accordingly.
Now, wait a second. If you're trying at home to follow the logic chain, ask yourself this. If Schiff doesn't know the whistleblower's name, as he's repeatedly claimed, how can he know that name is about to be revealed? And by the way, you could ask the same question of Alexander Vindman. Vindman also claims not to know who the whistleblower is, yet at the same time, he told us today, his testimony could reveal the identity of the whistleblower, the one whose name he doesn't know.
Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, you testified in the deposition that you did not know who the whistleblower was. Or is.
I do not know who the whistleblower is. That is.
How is it possible for you to name these people and then out the whistleblower?
Per the advice of my counsel, I've been advised not to answer specific questions about members of the intelligence community.
It raises some questions. His claim is, my lawyers have instructed me not to say relevant things. But when Devin Nunes pushed him on that, Vindman protested that he wasn't being treated with the proper respect. Watch.
Mr. Vindman, you testified in your deposition that you did not know the whistleblower.
Ranking member, it's Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, please.
Got that? It's Lieutenant Colonel Vindman to you, leading candidate for Defense Minister of Ukraine. Your insolence has been noted. It went on like this today, around and around, for hours and hours and hours, literally hours and hours. The one thing nobody seemed to want to talk about was how we got here in the first place, which is to say, Hunter Biden. Remember him, Hunter Biden? He's the lackluster politician's son who somehow not only got into Yale Law School. Did you get into Yale Law School? Oh, you're not a genius? No, you didn't. Not only did that, but made close to $1 million working in the Ukrainian energy business despite knowing nothing about Ukraine or energy. Even by the standards of international corruption, it turned out that he struck a remarkably corrupt deal. How corrupt? Well, an analysis by Watchdog Research found that Hunter Biden's pay on the board of Burisma Energy amounted to 12 times what is typical for a company of that size. And yet some are still claiming that Hunter Biden was hired by Burisma to assist with, and we're quoting now, transparency and corporate reform. Amazing. Hilarious, actually, but also depressing, because in the end, this isn't really about Hunter Biden. It's not actually even really about the impeachment of the president. What you're seeing here, the story that's unfolding, is a story about America's ruling class, some of which have been bought off by foreign entities. Yet not surprisingly, in fact, because of that fact, that is the one thing that you're not supposed to ask about. So shut up and praise Alexander Vindman, potential Ukrainian defense minister.
All right, Democrats, quid quo pro. Well, now it's bribery, narrative collapsing. They've shifted from extortion to bribery, from quid pro quo, but once again, facts are getting in the way. Here to shake it all out, Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham. You know, I've been asking your colleagues, and we've been getting a lot of response. Do the federal rules, as it relates to the admission of evidence, hearsay, is that going to be allowed in the Senate? They're all saying the same thing. No, that would never be allowed in the Senate. Who decides that? Would that be the Senate making those rules, or would it be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court that would preside over this madness?
It would be the Senate. You would have a resolution, has to be passed by 51 votes, setting the terms and conditions of the trial in the Senate. That has to be done by Senate resolution. What I will insist upon to get my vote is that the federal rules of evidence apply to the case presented in the House, so President Trump's defense team could object to hearsay, and I think about 95% of the testimony falls. The other thing I wanted in the trial resolution is the ability to confront one's accuser, because if you want to call the whistleblower in the Senate, I think you have a right to do that, because that's the person who started all this, and the right to confront your accusers, basic due process.
Well, that's the Sixth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Right. You're an attorney. Right. I would think that that's basic and fundamental. I couldn't imagine a Chief Justice that would preside over this and allow hearsay evidence that is not admissible in terms of federal law. And I can't believe that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court would not go along with the very clear, unambiguous language of the Constitution. I wouldn't believe that would happen, sir.
Well, you got to set the rules for the trial. We had a 100-0 resolution regarding the Clinton proceedings. I don't think Democrats are going to work with Mitch McConnell. I hope I'm wrong. But is it too much to ask that President Trump be given the same rights as every other American in a parking ticket case? That you can't get a parking ticket based on hearsay, and you're able to confront the person accusing you of illegal parking. Those basic things have to be in the trial resolution, I believe, and I hope we can get 51 votes for the idea I just expressed.
Okay, so you see what's happening over there. I can't get over the arguments that they're trying to make about the president. When we read the transcript, we're basically interviewing people to talk about the transcript that we all get to read ourselves and what they think of a transcript. Doesn't matter what they think in the end about the transcript because we see the transcript. We also know that Ukraine did nothing and they got the money. They did nothing. We also know that the president of Ukraine said 5 times, no pressure.
We choose truth over facts.
Oh, but we do have the issue of the Bidens. I'm having a hard time with that hypocrisy here. How do they all say, no, nobody of credibility has ever said there's anything wrong here? Yeah,
Nobody's looked. Nobody's looked.
I'm looking, and what I see is really bad. The very thing they're getting outraged about, Joe Biden's admitting, $1 billion, fire the prosecutor. You don't get the $1 billion if you don't. His son gets millions, and he actually said, nope, no experience whatsoever. None. Right. Zero.
Well, here's the argument that Joe Biden was asking the prosecutor to be fired because he was corrupt. But here's the question.
I don't believe it.
Well, but here's the question. All these phone calls that took place between Biden and President Poroshenko, the then president of the Ukraine, most of them occurred after the raid on the gas company by the prosecutor.
Slow down, Senator. Wait. I want everyone to hear you.
This is
the phone calls that took place between the former president of Ukraine and Joe Biden right around the time this is happening. Wait a minute. Are there transcripts of those calls?
Well, here's what somebody needs to ask. Okay, Joe Biden had the Ukraine portfolio. About every month he would call the Ukraine. But after the raid on the gas company, where Hunter Biden was a board member, they raided the president of the gas company's home. After that, you see about 3 to 4 phone calls in 4 or 5 days between Joe Biden and the president of the Ukraine. Then you see the case dropped. You also see Hunter Biden's business partners contacting the State Department, complaining about the raid on the gas company and saying it would, this could affect Hunter Biden. I want somebody to look into that.
I want the transcripts released. I want the Putin-Obama transcripts released after he had more flexibility. I want the Obama-Iranian Mullah's transcripts released when he gave them $150 billion. I got to ask you one off question here. December 11th, Michael Horowitz. That means we're going to get it hopefully the week before so we can absorb it and not on a Friday, no Friday dump.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, I think so. I think you got to be, just stay tuned. December 11th, be here before you know it, and it'll be out before the hearing.
Is this another BS that's coming, or is this the real deal?
You can put this one in the bank.
All right, Senator, thank you for all you do.
President Obama will go down as perhaps the worst president in the history of the United States! Exclamation point. At real Donald Trump. Yeah, at real Donald Trump. At least I will go down as a president.
Let me say, it is my high honor and distinct privilege to introduce to you the President-elect of the United States of America, Donald Trump.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. Sorry to keep you waiting. Complicated business. Complicated.